We are going to start a look for the summer, for the duration of the summer, most likely, looking at faith, this topic. And in the book of Hebrews, as Joe read, in chapter 11, there's this long list of people, Old Testament characters, that the writer gives us. And the reason why he gives us this is because in chapter 12, verse 1 of Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, he says, listen, therefore, since you have all these witnesses, and what he means by that is, looking back in chapter 11, he's saying, look at all these people, okay? If you want to know what faith is, he says, here's the definition of faith in verse 1, but he wants to give us the narrative of faith. He wants to give us the examples of faith, not just simply as models, but as illustrations of it. So it's very easy to give a definition of what faith is. It's much more, it's one other thing to look at the examples, to look at the narratives, the stories that he gives us. And he gives us a long list. We'll be going through each of these as sort of a character study each week on who this person was, and why does he mention this person, and why does this person that he's talking about have anything to do with faith? And what can we learn about this? See, here's the thing. Everybody that he mentions in chapter 11, the writer of Hebrews, if you go through it, we only read the first part of it, which mentions Abel, who we'll look at today. If you go through that whole list, you got people like Moses, and there's David, and there's Abraham, and there's this long list of people who, in the church, we refer to them as the heroes of faith, right? These are the people who lived whole lives. They made bold decisions. They lived courageously. They lived almost fearlessly. And the writer of Hebrews wants us to look into their lives because that's what he says. It's available for you and for me. If we pour into what faith is, if we pour into who these people are and how they demonstrated faith, and what the gospel does to free you and me, it can light us on fire. It can change the course of our life, to live courageously, to make decisions without worry and care and concern, to not be burdened down by the things that often burden us down. So, we're going to take one each week and look at these folks and what they have to tell us about faith. Now, here's a caveat. Here's a disclaimer. It's very easy to look at this list if you go through Hebrews chapter 11. And you look at all the names, Abraham, Moses, David, Joseph, I mentioned Isaac, all these people that if you read the Old Testament, you're familiar with their stories. And it's very easy. It's very easy for some of us who struggle with faith, who struggle with knowing who God is and where he is in our life and having trust in him. It's very easy for us to look at this list and say, thank you, Pastor. Great list. I'm not on that. Because we've almost put these people on pedestals. The Davids and the Abrahams and the Moses of the world to say, listen, they had bold faith. I'm not there yet. I'm not nearly as powerful or strong as they are. What you're going to see over the next weeks, that as we look into this list that he gives us is comprised of misfits, liars, cheaters, second-class citizens. It's filled with the people who are on the margins of the world. It's filled with the losers, the mistake makers, the sinners. People like you and me. And it's also easy to say, here's a second disclaimer. The first one is, don't put them on a pedestal. The writer and the stories that we'll see take them off that pedestal and show you that they are just like you and me. Secondly, people have issues with faith because they say, I just doubt God too much. I don't think I have strong faith. I'm a doubter, I'm a questioner. And as a side note, here at Soul Grace, if you know anything about me, I love doubts. Doubts are good. Doubts about God and who he is in your life show that probably your expectation of him is not in line with who he really is. And therefore, doubts are the starting point for faith, not the end of it. But as you go through this list of 11 people, as we go through each week and look at their lives, what we're going to see is that this list is comprised of doubters, questioners, seekers, lost, confused, and utterly clueless people. Just like you and me. So here's the chance. Let's look at this. Let's look at faith through the eyes of Abel, this character today. And let's see what Abel can teach us about faith and what the gospel can do about faith. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of Cain and Abel, some of you may not be, that takes place in Genesis 4. Abel is on our radar for about 5 minutes. He's a blip. It's a brief mention of him. Very, very brief. Now, here's the context. In Genesis 4, Adam and Eve just got kicked out of the garden. Now they're finding their own way in life. And they get pregnant, they have a baby. That first baby's named Cain. And his name means that the Lord has given me a man, meaning Eve is incredibly proud of Cain. That she has a man, a boy child. He's the privileged one. He's the one who's due rights. He's the one who's going to take the birthright. He's the one who would have every privilege and every circumstance going his way. He'd have every bit of favoritism from his mother and his father, because he was the firstborn son. Then along comes Abel. She gets pregnant again, she has another son, Abel, and Abel's the younger one. So they say that Abel's the one who works the sheep, and Cain is the one who works the ground. And the writer wants us to see this in the book of Hebrews. Abel is the only one who's contrasted with someone else. By that I mean, if you go back and read chapter 11, you'll see Abel is the only one that's mentioned on that list who's in contrast to someone else. Everybody else stands alone. But the writer says Abel gave an offering that was more acceptable than his brother's Cain. Now, what's an offering? Why is this important? You and I don't do offerings, at least the way they did. What does an offering even mean? Here's the central point. The writer of Hebrews mentioned their offerings because offerings were a way to say, God, accept me because of this. See, offerings at this time were a way in which people said, listen, I know, in and of myself, I don't measure up. So God, if you're going to accept me because of this, my record, my resume, my accomplishments, my achievements, whatever it may be. Offerings were simply a way to say, God, accept me. Now, you and I, if we're honest with ourselves, we do this every day of our life. Every day we make offerings. Something that we say to God or to others, to our spouses, to our friends, that we say, listen, accept me, approve me, because of this thing. And the writer of Hebrews wants us to look at the offerings today and see what the difference is between these two offerings. Why is one accepted and one rejected? And what does that mean for you? And what does it mean for faith? Here's what he's saying. Both offerings were a way to get acceptance. And you and I, we make offerings every day of our life. We make offerings, we try to prove ourselves, we try to get approved, we try to get the recognition from everybody else. We make offerings to the altar of ego, altars to the offering of job, of career, of anything, either for God's acceptance or for others. The difference is not if you make an offering, but how you make that offering and what type of offering it is. Let's look today at these three things. First, what I'm going to call the Cain offering. Secondly, the Abel offering. And lastly, the great offering. The offering of all offerings. The writer of Hebrews wants us to see the difference of these offerings. What's going on here? And why is it important for you and me? Because we're going to make offerings in our lives to get approved, to get accepted. And we can either do it the way of Cain or we can do it the way of Abel. Now let me say this. First, the Cain offering. Why is it that Cain's offering was not accepted? What was wrong with it? I heard a pastor actually, I hope he was joking one time, say that this proves that God is not a vegetarian because he approves the meat offering and he dismisses the vegetable offering. And I know, it doesn't sound stupid. I hope that pastor was joking. But that's it. If we read this story, it's instantly we go, wait a second, what's the difference of the two offerings? I don't get it. What, because he likes meat more than he likes vegetables? That doesn't make any sense. Is God just being fickle? Is he just being a picky God? Is he just being a little crabby? And he says, I like this one, I don't like that one. He's being completely arbitrary? No. Because look at verse 5 in Genesis 4. What happens to Cain when his offering is not accepted? The old King James English version said that his face was fallen. He becomes angry. He becomes bitter. He becomes resentful. See, Cain went into God's presence and he said, look, God, accept me because of this. What? My accomplishments. What I've done. What I've earned. What I've achieved. accept me on my merits. And God says, I will have none of that. See, a Cain offering at heart is really just a masked attempt for you and me to get acceptance based upon our own merits. It's a way for you and me to get acceptance and approval based upon what we've accomplished, our resume, our past, our history, all the good things we've done, all the good deeds we've done. Cain, he knows he's a sinner, but when he goes in the presence of God, his offering is simply a covering up of the fact that he's trying to prove himself. See, you'll know you're a Cain. If you want to know if you're a Cain or an Abel this morning, you know you're a Cain when you do something good. You offer something, or you give a sacrifice for it, and if people don't recognize it, you get bitter. See, you know you're a Cain when you get exposed for who you really are, and you can't stand it. God looks at Cain and he says, I know your heart. Regardless of the offering, I know why you brought this to me. All along, at Cain's reaction, we see that he was really just doing it for his own pleasure. He was doing it for his own approval. He wasn't doing it for God. He wasn't doing it out of faith. He was entirely self-centered. And he gets exposed by God, and he hates it. And it eats at him. To the point that he goes and kills his brother later. See, you know you're a Cain in life. You know you're making Cain offerings to other people. When they get rejected or they get spurned, and it eats at you, and you don't like it one bit. And you think, look what I've done for them. Look what I've earned. Look at all that I've accomplished. How dare they? That's Cain. God says, look, Cain, I know who you really are. And Cain can't stand it. He hates being exposed. And if we're honest in our lives, this is why I'm spending most of the time talking about a Cain offering, because this is where we are, if we're honest in our hearts. This is the type of offering that we give to God. This is the type of offering we give to others. Approve me by this. Approve me and accept me because of what I've done. And if you don't, how dare you? We're face-fallen. We're exposed. We're seen for who we really are. Let me give a quick illustration of this before I move on. John Paul Sartre, in his book, Philosopher, his book, Being in Nothingness, he illustrates this beautifully. The fundamental fear that we have, and why we make all Cain offerings, and what makes us a Cain. And he says this, he gives an illustration. The whole book's on being and nothingness, as you can guess by the title. Clever title. It's about being and about nothingness, about how you are as a human being and how you live. And he argues this. He says, the fundamental problem with all of us is shame. And we will do anything that we can do to cover it, hide it, push it to the sides so that no one sees it. He argues throughout this whole book that what we do is we keep other people at a distance and we objectify them, because if we let them in, they will see the shame in our hearts. And he illustrates it this way, by a keyhole. He says, listen, in our lives, it's very easy. You know a keyhole, right? When you look, people have keyholes, we just slide things nowadays. Go old school on me. Imagine a keyhole, okay? People were writing a long time ago. But it works. A keyhole, very small. If you look through the keyhole, you can see everything from the other side, but they can only see a little bit of you. Isn't it funny how that works? See, when you look through a keyhole, you can see, as Sartre says, the spectacle of the other. You can see every bit of them, all their shame, all of their messiness, but you hide yours, and you don't let them see it. And he says we live our lives as if we're all looking through a keyhole at other people, trying to make offerings, he doesn't say offerings, trying to cover up that shame. And he says, you know what the scariest time is? When you hear the floorboards creak behind you. Because he says, then you know that someone's looking at you. And that is the scariest moment. In his book, he says this. He says, what I apprehend immediately, when I hear the branches of the floorboards crackling behind me, it's not that there is someone there. It's that I'm fallen, that I have a body which can be hurt, that I occupy a place, and that I cannot, in any case, escape from the space in which I am without defense. In short, he says, I am seen. fundamental fear that you and I have is being seen for who we are. And we will do anything we can do to cover that up. A Cain offering is a cover-up. A Cain offering is a pointing to your record, your accomplishments in the eyes of God and saying, accept me because of that, not who I really am, or what I can do, or what I've done, or what I've achieved. The Cain offering, being a Cain, is doing everything we can do to maintain our keyhole view of everyone else. But it's the scariest thing in the world to think that someone would look through the keyhole in your life. Now, I spent the most of the time on that one, on the Cain offering, because I feel that that's probably what we wrestle with the most. Now let's look at Abel's offering. And why was this given in faith? Let me give a couple of reasons why. First, the Abel offering. In 11:4, Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verse 4, it says, Abel's offering was, quote unquote, more acceptable. And in Genesis 4, we see here that he brings the firstborn and the fat offerings. What is this? Again, is God just taking a meat eater and he doesn't like the vegetables? No. Here's what he's doing. For Abel to take the firstborn of his flock and bring it to the altar and burn it would be something similar to you taking your first paycheck of the month and burning it. I'm not saying do that. Please don't. Don't blame me for burning. Don't do that. Don't burn your paycheck. But if you did, wouldn't that show a tremendous amount of faith? See, the Abel offering is going to God and saying, I'm not going to point to my accomplishments. I'll point to you. It's about you, not about me. Abel's able to, do you understand this? His firstborn. This is the expensive, this is the choice meat. This is the one you go to market and sell for the most money. To give that away, to burn it, in the eyes of God would be utter lunacy. It would be like you burning your first paycheck of the month. Could you live like that? Wouldn't you have anxiety and worry and concern? Abel does it. Why? Because he has faith in something that's not in himself. The Cain offering is all about us. The Abel offering is all about him. Now, what part of your life right now would you say that you are unwilling to burn at the altar and give to God? That's the offering that you need to give. That's the offering of faith to say, listen, God, all my life I've carved out a little piece of my life and kept it from you. You're not allowed to touch this part. Whether it's my money, whether it's my career, whether it's my relationships, whatever it is, you can have domain over everything else, God, but you can't touch this part. That's the part you go to give him an offering. That's faith. To say, I trust you with the most intimate details of my life, Lord. I trust you that if I burned up this part of my life and I gave it to you, you can do something with it. The Abel offering is the ultimate submission to say, God, you are in absolute and utter control. Nothing do I hold back from you, nor do I come to you with my record for approval. I come to you on knees, burning up the part of my life that I've held back from you forever. That's faith. Now, we can stop there. We could. Not going to. We could. But then what I'm doing to you is I'm putting an incredible burden on you if I did that. Go be an Abel, not a Cain. All your life you've probably been a Cain. I've been a Cain. I've made Cain offerings all my life. I do it every day. Now I say to you, go be Abel, go have faith. Just burn up that part of your life and have faith. And you will say, what? I didn't come to church to get overwhelmed and burdened by this broad proclamation of faith. We can't stop there. The Abel offering was done in faith because it was the firstborn, his prized possession, that he was able to give away. But the Abel offering, the offering of Abel, only points to something greater. Smell. Everyone, take a breath. Cain, smell his offering. It was probably, we don't know, probably wheat. It smells good. It smells like the earth. Maybe an apple here or there. Those smell good. Fresh, especially if you bite into it. Maybe it was some bread. Fresh bread. Oh, the smell of that. Now, turn to the other side and take a whiff of Abel's sacrifice. Burning, rotting, bloody animal flesh. Disgusting. Profane. Disgusting. Cain's offering smelled good. It looked good on the surface, but deep down it was not the true offering of faith. Abel's offering, on the other hand, he knew something. He knew that if he was going to approach God, and if he was going to be accepted, it would take something far greater. It would take blood. It would take a gruesome act of slaughtering an animal, carrying it to the stone, and lighting it on fire. Oh, the wrenching stench of that smell. Abel knew that was the only thing that was going to bring him into acceptance of God. You and I know something greater. Because in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul says in verse 2, there was one who was a greater offering, a fragrant offering, for you and for me. See, Cain's offering was ultimately all about himself, what he proved, what he did, his works, his accomplishment. It was a cover-up. And then he was exposed and he hated it and he hated it. Abel's offering pointed at something even greater. It pointed at Jesus on the cross. That's who Paul's talking about. That it was Jesus who was a fragrant offering for you and for me. Abel had faith that he could give up his first portions. He could give up the fat of the animal, which was the prize. And he had faith that God would deliver. Brothers and sisters, this morning, how much more so do you and I, when we look at the cross, not have faith that he will deliver for us? Abel lost the firstborn of his flock. God lost his firstborn for you. You see now, faith, it's not just a technique or a skill or a practice, it's a power. Faith is a power in seeing the greatest offering of all time, given up for you and for me. That's what the cross says. It says, listen, what can you not give up and not have fear, anxiety, and worry and stress? What causes it in your life? It's because you're trying to make Cain offerings, weak offerings. Be an Abel, but you can only be an Abel if you look at the cross and see him cut for you, bleeding for you. In closing, this changes your entire relationship with God. You no longer go to him and say, look what I've done. You now go to him and say, look what Jesus has done. Look what he did for someone like me. And let me tell you a story to give you the magnitude of this as I close. It's a little story time. And I love telling this story mostly because I just like this person's name so much. Augustus Toplady. That's a real name, believe it or not. Augustus Toplady. I love this guy. Wrote an article in a magazine in England in 1775. And it was a regular old magazine article at the end of the magazine. And he talked about the national debt of England. And at the time, the national debt, as any national debt is quite high. And he talks about the national debt and how high it is. And if you've ever been in the States, you might see one of the many countries have this, a little clock that runs with the national debt. And every second of every day, of every minute, of every hour, it's adding up and adding up and adding up and adding up. And Augustus Toplady writes this article and he says, listen, the national debt is so huge. He says, you do this as a spiritual exercise. Because Augustus Toplady was a clergyman, a pastor, he says, do this. Consider the national debt of your heart. Consider, and he did the math, if every second of the day, for 50 years of your life, you sinned, or you made a Cain offering, if If every second of every day, which is about our average, is it not? If every second of every day for 50 years of your life, you were continually self-centered, continually selfish, you were all about yourself, offering up Cain offerings, sinning, lying, cheating, whatever you had to do to advance your own interests, he says, if you added it all up, over 50 years it would be 1.5 billion. Now who can pay that down? And he ends the article this way. He says, you can't pay it down. But if you think about the national debt of your heart, how many Cain offerings you and I make on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, how it's all about us. He says, if you ponder that for a moment, and you know what Jesus did for you. He closes with these lines, which may sound a little familiar to you. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. Naked come to thee for dress, helpless look to thee for grace. Foul I to the fountain fly, wash me, Savior, or I die. You may know those words because they became a hymn later, Rock of Ages, cleft for me. He says this, if you know the depths of your heart, but if you know the depths of his love, you will go to God saying, nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. Naked, look to thee for dress. Helpless, look to thee for grace. Foul, I to the fountain fly. Oh, wash me, Savior, or I die. He's washed you. And if you've been a Christian for years, or you've never been a Christian before, today is a chance to know that it was his offering that did it for you, so that you and